Welcome to the Brain People Podcast, a show where four mental health experts team up to bring you practical tools for overcoming mental health challenges. The Brain People don't replace your doctor or therapist, but we will give you some extra tools to help you on your journey. So join us as we fight mental illness, one episode at a time.
Welcome to the Brain People Podcast. My name is Dr. Katie Cruz. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and one of the hosts. And joining me is
Jonathan Edens. I'm a psychiatric PA.
All right. And today we are talking about sleep hygiene, specifically what it is, why it's important, and of course, how to optimize it. And I know this is a topic that Jonathan is passionate about, so I'm glad to interview you and you can share a lot of practical tips with our listeners today.
Yeah.
So why don't we just begin with what is sleep hygiene? I know we know what is sleep, and we think about hygiene in relation to other things, but what is sleep hygiene?
Yeah, it's interesting. I kind of assumed it was part of the regular vernacular, if you will. And oftentimes I'd find myself kind of mentioning it with my patients sort of haphazardly and getting a lot of weird looks. What are you talking about? Like, I know sleep, I know hygiene. How do those two things relate? And so when we think of the definition of the phrase sleep hygiene, we're referring to a set of practices and habits that are conducive to getting a good night's sleep. So that's a fairly broad statement, right? So it can include quite a few different things. So this could be things like establishing a regular routine that promotes better sleep quality. It can be creating a sleep conducive environment. Also avoiding stimulating activities or sleep deteriorating substances before bedtime. So these would all be included within that realm of sleep hygiene.
And we'll cover those more in depth, right, for our listeners. Now, why is it important? I think sometimes when it comes to sleep, people are just like, it just happens. Like, why are we talking about how to strategize and make it better? Why is it important to talk about sleep hygiene?
Yeah, so the importance of sleep hygiene comes into play because so many people don't have an easy time with sleep. Obviously, maybe some of the listeners have never dealt with sleep problems, but you probably know somebody that does. Maybe it's your partner or a child or a parent or a friend of yours. Right? It's one of the most common comorbidities that I deal with depression and anxiety is either a primary or a secondary sleep disorder. And so it's a frequent conversation that we generally tend to have in our clinic. And just some statistics to kind of hammer the point home. According to the National Institute of Health, about 1/3 of Americans will have a sleep disorder at some point in their lives.
Wow.
So this would include things such as insomnia, sleep apnea, restless legs. These are some of the most common types of sleep disorders. In the case of insomnia, it's actually the most prevalent of the chronic sleep disorders, with about 10% of adults meeting clinical criteria, at the current moment. So, I mean, that's a fairly large swath of the population. Assuming in America, I know there's over 300 million individuals. I'm not exactly sure how many of those are adults, but we're talking maybe 20 to 30 million people that are dealing with a significant sleep impairment.
And those are the ones that are diagnosed.
Right.
Like, there's a lot of my clients who have had sleep difficulties and they just kind of bite the bullet and they just keep kind of pushing through. I'm like, hey, do you know that you could actually improve that, especially if it's been for so long? Right.
And just for our listeners, just so you know, we do have an episode specifically on insomnia. And so dealing with some of the diagnostic criteria of that, some of the most common causes of it, some of the treatments for it as well. And so we did briefly mention sleep hygiene in that episode too. That was episode number 14. So it's a great introduction or a great episode to listen to after this, so you can get a more comprehensive education on insomnia.
And we forget how important sleep is, right? It's something that if we're in a routine of lacking sleep or not having enough, or we've just kind of bit the bullet, we don't realize that it's impacting us in many ways. What are some of those ways that it impacts us?
So there's a lot of ways in which it's significant. One of the studies that I mentioned, I believe in the previous episode, and I'll mention it again here because I thought it was really important, was this idea of cumulative sleep debt. And many people assume that, I'm getting close to the recommended hours, but if a typical sleep cycle is about 90 minutes, let's assume that you get one less than what's recommended. So assuming 5 sleep cycles at 7.5 hours, let's just say on average you get about 6 hours per night, right? That's over the course of like a week. In terms of when they did a study on people that had one less sleep cycle on average per night in comparison to those that spent an entire night without any sleep. And their ability to perform on driving tests was actually about the same, right? And so there was significant impairment in, safety and response while driving in both of those scenarios. So to say both cumulative sleep debt and nights of 1 or 2 significant reduced hours of sleep are both incredibly impactful.
Yeah.
In especially in the short term, but in the long term, it can lead to things such as, or I should say, it can exacerbate conditions like obesity, diabetes, and cardiovascular disease. It can impair immune function. People that don't sleep very well are often more inclined, to get acute viral infections and things of that nature. It also increases the risk of accidents or injuries due to daytime drowsiness. So just like I was mentioning with the impairment while driving, of course, if you are significantly sleep deprived, it can be almost as dangerous as driving drunk, right? It can reduce cognitive performance and memory retention. So think about both your personal life, but especially your professional life. And I've had a lot of patients that do have insomnia, and as a result of this impairment in their concentration, lots of brain fog, poor memory, they're just making more mistakes at work. Their performance goes down. Some of them, are maybe at risk of even losing their jobs as a result of it. And then the last one, because of course this is a mental health podcast, things such as higher levels of depression, anxiety, and irritability. And once again, in episode 14, we did talk about some of the studies related to insomnia and how those specifically correlate with those conditions.
Yeah, I remember in graduate school, it was some sort of talk that I listened to because I was like, I want to be the best. I want to be the top of my game. And it was talking about sleep, and the presenter mentioned like your brain is functioning at the level of a 4th grader when you're lacking sleep. And I remember that just like, okay, I'm changing all my sleep habits. I'm like, I'm going to bed at 9, waking up at 5. And it was just really encouraging because I think, this is counterculture of, you need to work harder, kind of like when you were mentioning with people who are making mistakes at work. It's like, oh, I just have to work harder. And we don't realize that if we invest in our sleep quality, that actually, and I like the word investment because it can be sometimes a sacrifice, but it really provides a lot of benefits, not just performance-wise, but also in our overall health. So,
yeah, for each hour of sleep you're getting less, you're probably decreasing your efficiency, in the tasks that you do, probably by at least double the amount, right? And so ultimately, it is one of those things that you want to prioritize in order to be most productive during the daytime. And so some of the ways in which sleep hygiene can benefit you, in part because it improves sleep, it can lead to faster sleep onset, it can promote longer sleep duration, it can reduce nighttime awakenings, and can improve the overall perceived quality of sleep, aka you wake up feeling more restored, right? So, and of course, if you're chronically tired, you're probably not going to be particularly happy with your life.
Yeah. So let's just jump right in, right? The hacks of optimizing our sleep. And I love how detailed you are, Jonathan, and going through the different ones. Sometimes if I don't have enough time, I think about like internally, what can we do, and externally. But I love that there's actually a lot we can do externally, even before we jump to like internal things, which can sometimes be harder to fix. But our bodies are kind of picky.
Yeah.
So making sure that we have a really good external environment is really important to our sleep.
And before we jump into some of these hacks, there's a lot of things that we're going to be discussing. And while this is not a comprehensive list, because of the sheer quantity of the things that I'm going to mention, for some people, if they have never really thought about this, it can seem overwhelming. And so the idea here is not to inundate you and tell you that you need to do everything on this list by any means. Most of this stuff I do, and I've done for a while, but it was things that I incorporated into my sleep hygiene regimen over a period of like a decade. And so it was kind of optimizing things as I go to find out what works for me and what doesn't. And over that time frame, going through periods where I'm more consistent than others. And so that's just the reality of things. And so for those that are listening, if there's something that maybe stands out to you as, oh, that seems doable. That seems like it's not going to cause a lot of inconvenience, but can give me a slight edge on optimizing the performance of my sleep, then might be worth looking into a little bit further. If you only take away one hack, though,
you should end with that.
I know. It's going to be memorize the 3-2-1 rule. So it's fairly simple, but essentially 3 hours before bed, no more food. 2 hours before bed, no more liquids. And 1 hour before bed, no more screen time. Now, we could make an argument that maybe those numbers could be even larger, right? Like, so maybe a longer time before bed without any screen time. But I like just the simplicity of the 3-2-1 rule. So I'll repeat that. No food 3 hours before bed, no water or other liquids 2 hours before bed, and no electronic devices, no artificial light 1 hour before bed.
Okay, that's great.
So let's actually go through a bunch of different, basically, categories in terms of how we can set ourselves up for optimizing our sleep. And so the first thing we want to look at in creating a sleep conducive environment, and arguably the most important, is going to be light. So you don't need to necessarily have a background in eye or like eye physiology or brain chemistry to sort of understand that it's very understandable that our circadian rhythms are predominantly regulated by the amount of light that our eyes consume, and the wavelengths are going to, and the colors that we see, throughout the day are going to influence basically our circadian rhythm as well. And so there's been a lot of discussion over the last number of years, especially now that everybody has a smartphone, about the potential damaging effects of blue light. And essentially, blue light is partially so damaging because it tricks the brain into thinking that it's still daytime. And so it is going to disrupt the natural circadian rhythm, impair melatonin secretion when it should otherwise be being secreted, right? And so the number one tip for optimizing light and darkness is going to be getting off of your electronic devices, like I was just referencing, at least an hour before bed. That's going to give your eyes and your mind enough time to adjust. So some ways that you can reduce the amount of artificial light or blue light. It's become very popular to use things like blue light blocking glasses. Many people, when they just jump on Amazon or jump on Google and they buy some of those blue light blocking glasses, they'll just buy the ones that look the best, right? So they'll buy the clear ones. And those ones, they work, but not particularly well, as they really only block maybe somewhere between 20 and 40% of the blue light. And so you still get a substantial amount, considering that the amount of blue light being emitted by electronic devices is very, very high when compared to natural light, say, that's coming from the sun. They do make yellow tinted glasses as well, and so those can block somewhere between 50 to 70%. And then they also make amber or red tinted glasses that block somewhere above 90%. And so a great way, if you are buying, say, more than one, or if you just want to buy one, kind of depends on the use case. So if you do find yourself, like I do oftentimes, needing to do some work on my computer prior to bed, within a few hours before bed, I'm usually going to be using my darker colored glasses, assuming I don't need to have super accurate color correction because I'm editing or something like that. Any questions about that, Katie? No,
it makes perfect sense. It's kind of like the reality of, ideally there are things that we can do of, not using the devices, but I like these alternatives because sometimes it is difficult, whether work related or just life related.
Yeah.
And so it's providing other alternatives for people to make these adjustments with still the same principles in mind of how it impacts our circadian rhythm. Yeah.
Some other things that you can do, and once again, if you're required for some reason to be on an electronic device, let's just say you are running a side hustle, for example, and you want to be able to spend time with your kids after dinner once you get home, and so you put them to bed, and then you need to get kind of on the computer, right? This would be a scenario in which it makes a lot of sense, and you just want to optimize. So you can use the blue light blocking glasses. You can obviously lower the light exposure in the house. You can use candles. You can use smart LED bulbs that have more of a reddish hue to them. That's also helpful. But a lot of these technological devices also have the capacity to reduce the amount of blue light in them. So there's certain apps like Flux, and that's F.lux. It's a free download for Windows or Mac. And what's nice about that, you get it set up once, and then it'll actually change the amount of blue light that's being emitted based on the time of day. So it'll put in your coordinates essentially, and so it'll kind of monitor when the sunset's going down, and it'll start to naturally change slowly so that you barely even notice it. Most Apple products now also have night shift options, and so your iPhone, your iPad, your Mac, these are things that you can schedule in there. And so I often have some degree of night shift mode on all the time, and then it gets more intense at nighttime. So some other ways to optimize light, this would be things like blackout curtains, especially if you live on a street with a lot of light, right? If you have maybe a lot of cars driving by with their headlights on, or there's a lot of street lamps, and so you've got that light kind of glaring in the windows, that can be disruptive to your sleep.
Or currently with the full moon.
Or with a full moon, that would work too. So blackout curtains can definitely be a useful thing. Sleep masks can also be a useful thing in certain environments. I generally tend to prefer the blackout curtains, but sleep masks are good in a pinch. They do create a problem though, because while if you use blackout curtains to block out the night during the nighttime, they're still going to block the light in the morning time, right? When you want the sun to be hopefully waking you up naturally. And so the best solution that I found for that is something called like a sunrise alarm clock. And so this is basically an alarm clock that has a built-in light into it. And so it'll get increasingly brighter over the course of the duration of time that you set for it. So often what I would do is I would set it for maybe 10 to 30 minutes before the time I have to get up. And so the light will gently turn on, and then every 1 to 2 minutes, it'll get a little bit more intense. And so oftentimes I'll wake up in more of a natural state, feeling more restored because I'm not in the middle of deep sleep. And another tip is just getting early morning sun exposure, right? That's better than really any other hack that you can do, is just trying to sleep according and waking up according to the sun. And so if you can go to bed within a few hours after it's gone down, if you can wake up shortly after it's risen, and make sure that you are exposing your eyes to the sun, not looking directly at it, but maybe looking out your window, at whatever you have to look at outside of your window, or going outside and maybe enjoying your morning beverage or your news scrolling or whatnot, outside.
It's kind of just always interesting when we're talking about mental health principles of how much of it's just going back to the basics.
Yep. I mean, a lot of this is really a response to our change in environment, right? It's very different than how it used to be, right? We predominantly live inside lives, at least most of us do, right? And so our daily habits have changed, and so we've become more disconnected from the natural environment. And so some of this is primarily a means of mitigating the damage from the lack of natural cues that we would otherwise have. So the next thing I think to optimize would be sound. And so many people have heard of white noise, but there's other types of color noises. This would include things like pink noise, brown noise, and gray noise. Knowing the differences isn't really all that important, but many people do find that they may prefer one over the other if they are inclined to use some sort of noise or noise machine in order to drown out maybe excessive intermittent noises that would otherwise be waking them up. Because oftentimes that simple car honk in the middle of the night, right? Or that bird that likes to squeak, not squeak, that likes to chirp.
Some sound like squeaking.
That likes to chirp at certain hours of the morning, right? These things, if you can drown them out and not wake up, it's going to drastically improve the quality of your sleep because you're not having so many frequent interruptions, and then that delay in being able to get back into your normal sleep routine. So you can go on most smartphones. There's tons of free apps. You can try a few of these. Pink noise would be things like light rain, wind, river flowings. Brown noise, things like strong waterfalls, rumbling thunder, heavy rainfall tends to be a deeper. If you struggle with tinnitus, gray noise might be a good option for you. And so that's a blend of white and pink noise. And so many people do find relief listening to that particular type if that's something that they struggle with. Another way to drown out noise is earplugs. Now, I know some people don't like the fit of earplugs. Some people don't love having earplugs in their ears because they fear maybe missing out on something important. And so there's a variety of different options out there. You can get ones that are relatively low in terms of the decibel blocking capabilities that they have. There are some that are like high fidelity, often used for concerts. So it reduces the decibels, but still keeps the quality. And so that can help to drown out a lot of the more minor sounds that aren't important to hear, but still allow you to listen to, say a baby crying or some sort of emergency that you might need to get up for.
Now, do you ever have people who kind of push back on this of like, do I have to just get used to my surroundings? Because do we sometimes create like this, it has to be perfect, that I'm not allowing my brain to just adjust and kind of build tolerance to noise?
Sure. And you definitely, and like I said, none of this is necessarily hard and fast, and every individual is going to be different. And I found for myself personally that arguably there's probably a little bit of a psychological dependence that I've developed over the years because I like having white noise. It helps kind of drown out some of the thoughts. It also, we live on a ranch, and so there's a bunch of sort of random noises. And if to me, it means that I can wake up less often throughout the night, it's worth it for me. And so I can still definitely sleep without that, but I have generally found that it's not as good quality. And so I think it's worth testing, doing what we call split B testing, and just saying, does this seem to work better for me? Does it seem to not work better for me? And I'd find it probably hard to believe that somebody would become so dependent on something like white noise that they wouldn't be able to sleep without it. There are lots of medications where that really is the case, but with these types of hacks, they're not addicting per se, right?
Yeah, kind of made me have the thought of like with parenting, when you have a baby, some people recommend of like don't provide too much shelter that the baby doesn't, it has such a perfect environment that becomes overly sensitive, right, later on in years. So it's just kind of interesting that it's finding that balance. And then for some people, especially those who struggle with insomnia or other conditions, it's like, some people do require more and more control in their environment.
Yeah, and I'm glad you bring up the baby thing. I really should say, or have started, that these recommendations are primarily for adults. There is definitely a stronger argument, and that's particularly relevant to me as we're just about to welcome a baby into the world. And so when the brain is developing, there's a different set of needs in that context than somebody that already has a fully developed brain. Especially when it comes to this. I've recently seen a study about Alzheimer's and things like the smell and the sound that you are passively listening to or smelling while you're asleep can create new brain pathways that may actually be somewhat preventative for something like Alzheimer's disease.
Okay.
So
Interesting.
fairly interesting, kind of budding science, but something I just wanted to throw out there.
Yeah.
The next thing that we can control is temperature. And most everybody has somewhat of an idea. Most of the research generally suggests that around 65 tends to be kind of the optimal temperature range for most people. So somewhere within 60 to 70 degrees tends to be just the best for a wide variety of individuals. Now, aside from using AC, using heat, kind of depending on your environment, Some other things that you could consider, and these options do tend to be, these options do tend to be more expensive. So, but just so you know, they are out there. Things like the Chili Pad, the Bed Jet, or a company called 8 Sleep makes this bed sheet cover, and pretty much all of these products, they give you finer control over the temperature. So if you and your partner, say, have very different needs when it comes to the temperature you prefer to sleep at, most of them offer that option to, say, have one side of the mattress be 70 degrees and the other side be 60 degrees. So it's a nice way to kind of further optimize if you have the extra money to spend on it. Humidity is also an important thing, and I think that's a less considered characteristic, maybe especially in California. If you're living in the South, then it's probably people are more inclined to think about this. But optimal sleep humidity is generally considered to be somewhere between 30 and 60%. Depending on the climate, you may need to consider a humidifier or a dehumidifier. So here in California, my wife and I, we often have a humidifier because the AC is usually running at night during the summers, in Sacramento, and so the AC is going to kind of function as a dehumidifier, so the air often gets quite dry, and we find that we can usually put almost a gallon of water in our humidifier and have it set to around 40%, and it still uses most of it throughout the night.
Yeah, because I think people often forget about how humidity impacts our ability to breathe. And so breathing for sleep is crucial. So,
and perfect segue, because we were just about to get into that. But high humidity can create mold, excessive sweating, and increased breathing difficulties, especially for those with like asthma, COPD, allergies. And so an important consideration there. However, the opposite can also be somewhat true, but for a different reason. And so low humidity, irritates the mouth and the nasal passages, because it's important to have a certain amount of moisture in your nasal passages in order to optimize oxygenation. It also dries out the skin, dries out the lips, and so that can make just the overall sleeping experience be a little bit more uncomfortable. Talking about oxygen and CO2, we did cover breathing fairly extensively in just a recent episode with me and Dr. Binus. So I'll refer you listeners to that episode for a better understanding of optimal breathing, primarily being through the nose. But if you let's use an analogy here real quick. If you're in a coffin, and I realize that for some people this is just a scary thought, but if you are trapped in a coffin, right, what takes you, you're going to fall asleep, right, because the rising CO2 levels. Now, if you are in a small room throughout the night with two individuals, say, two partners, right, sleeping in bed in a small room, breathing for 8 hours with poor ventilation, your CO2 levels can actually build up substantially. And those CO2 levels can impact the quality of your sleep. Oftentimes, it's going to lead to excessive fatigue first thing in the morning, right? It's going to lead to more brain fog during the day. And that can, for a lot of people, especially those prone to mental health issues, can lead to more depression and anxiety symptoms, right?
It's kind of funny that you use that correlation there. Coffin and like married life. No.
You're funny. Newly married individual. I'm just kidding. So it's important to have, fresh air, right? It's important to have adequate oxygen. And so opening up a window, if that's possible, maybe having plants. My wife likes having oxygen, or I should say plants that are known to produce a lot of oxygen. So we have a few of those in our rooms. Even things like nasal strips or nasal dilators. So this can improve airflow and also incentivize nose breathing over mouth breathing. Obviously, when you're sleeping, it's kind of hard to be intentional about which one you're going to use. And so if you can open up the nasal passages, then it's going to be less likely there's some sort of obstruction, and then your mouth will, or I should say your brain will automatically switch to breathing through your mouth. Another option to incentivize nasal breathing, and this has gained a lot of popularity in certain kind of biohacking circles over the last few years, would be using some sort of mouth tape. So, and we talk about this in our breathing, so if you want a further exploration of that, listen to that episode as well. Specifically, though, you'd want a woven cloth type tape. This is usually used in like medical scenarios, but you can get them at just about any drugstore. But you'll just place it over your lips, and once again, that's going to incentivize you to breathe through your nose. Now, obviously, people with certain conditions should probably avoid this, but if you're otherwise healthy, this can be a great option for many, especially if you tend to be a mouth breather. So air quality is the last one of these specific characteristics for creating a conducive environment that I'll touch on. But if your home is kind of prone to allergens, or you have a lot of allergies to say pollen or dust or smoke or animal hair, then that can definitely impair your sleep quality, especially if you're and by having allergies, that's creating some sort of obstruction, some nasal obstruction, and so you're more inclined to breathe through your mouth. Just using something like an air purifier, or using your allergy medication, that can definitely be helpful.
All right. Well, that's a lot of things that we can consider just in our environment,
Hmm.
right? The next one I think is really important is one I tend to focus a lot with my clients. And I think just fixing this alone can, even without maybe making all the changes in your environment, can already dramatically improve your sleep. And that's establishing a regular sleep schedule.
Yeah, so that's definitely one of, if not the core tenet of a proper sleep hygiene protocol, is essentially getting to bed around the same time and waking up around the
Hmm.
same time, and doing so, if possible, 7 days a week.
Hmm.
Right? There's a little room for flexibility there, especially if you're keeping it, say, within like an hour and a half. So you're only losing out on one sleep cycle. But if for optimization, if that's what you're going for, then generally speaking, yeah, having a similar bedtime, a similar
Hmm.
awake time, even if you're retired or there's no reason for you to
Hmm.
get up at a certain time, it's still a good idea if you're getting sufficient sleep to be making sure that you're waking up around the same time each day. And the time in which you end up going to bed and waking up actually does seem to have some scientific
Hmm.
backing behind it. So specifically what we're referring to is trying to get to bed before midnight. So there was a study of over 88,000 adults, and it found that those who went to bed between 10 p.m. and 11 p.m. were less likely to develop heart disease than those that went to bed either earlier than that or later than that, which is pretty interesting. Some studies also suggest that people who go to bed before midnight tend to live longer. That 90-minute phase before midnight is considered by many to be one of the most powerful phases of sleep.
Hmm.
So, a note on napping and sleep restriction. So, naps can be incredibly helpful, but also incredibly hurtful for certain individuals. And where it can be helpful is when it's not disrupting your nighttime circadian rhythm.
Hmm.
Oftentimes, what people do is they use naps, however, to compensate for bad sleep that they're getting throughout the night. And so they're not creating enough sleep debt the following night by napping,
Hmm.
or as you like to say, sleep drive,
Hmm.
right? And so as a result, they just get stuck in the same cycle
Hmm.
of taking naps throughout the day, and their sleep at night, which is going to be considered best, just doesn't get consistent like it should.
Hmm.
And so sleep restriction, while hard, is one of the really important components of getting your circadian rhythm back to where it should be. If you're having a lot of issues with falling asleep, waking up too early, waking up many times throughout the night, for maybe due to anxiety or just primary insomnia, then forcing yourself to stay up during the
Hmm.
daytime so you can create enough sleep drive so that you actually will fall asleep hopefully at the right time. And another note, also just using your bed primarily for sleep,
Hmm.
right? We want to minimize activities that don't fall within that category.
Yeah, because I think people forget that our brain associates things together. And
Hmm.
so if I associate my bed with anything but sleep, it's activating that, right? So it's like, oh, I
Yeah,
associate it with just staying there. Then it's like, and being awake, wide awake. Then I'm going to get to bed. And it's like, oh, are we doing that again? Like,
sure.
I'm typically here to just, stay awake. And so training your brain to be activated in a specific way that is for sleep.
Yeah, I've had a number of people come in telling me just initially, I'm waking up at this time in the middle of the night, 2 a.m., and I just can't seem to fall back asleep or can't seem to not wake up. And they usually don't want to admit this because I think they know what I'm going to say. But oftentimes what they do is they jump on their phone, right, as a means of trying to lure themselves back into sleep, or they'll go and grab a snack, or they'll go and sit on the couch and watch TV. And so all of these things are incentivizing your brain to wake up during that time. And so it's looking for the dopamine hit that you get from those activities in the middle of the night. And so you're actually reinforcing a bad habit that's likely only shooting yourself in the foot, metaphorically speaking, by your brain looking for that reward at that time of the day.
Yeah.
So another thing you want to do is avoid stimulating activities before bedtime. This one's fairly self-explanatory, but things like scrolling social media, watching certain videos that might be kind of excitatory, such as horror, action movies, playing video games, listening to really like pump up music or hype music. These are obviously things that are going to stimulate the central nervous system and make it harder for you to fall asleep.
And even like stimulating from the perspective of stress. So I know people who do like very stressful activities if they're trying to plan the next day and now there's a difference between like making sure you're addressing things so that you're not thinking about it before bed. But some people, even just from a perspective of high anxiety activities before bed and just arousing your, sympathetic nervous system, and then you're trying to then sleep and rest.
Yeah, and oftentimes what ends up happening there, I think, is people don't give the attention those things need during the daytime, so they're procrastinating, and then they finally try to get to sleep, and that's the first time in the day that they've had to kind of think.
Period. Just think.
Just think in general, let their mind wander, and it often is going to go to those kind of stressful things.
Your brain's like, how about now?
Yeah. So some relaxation techniques could be a good idea. This would include things like progressive muscle relaxation, box breathing, mindfulness meditation, thought journaling, gratitude practice, prayer. These are all great things that you can be doing prior to bed if you are feeling a little stressed out and you do need to reduce some of that stress or anxiety. Now, we're not going to go into any of those if you're interested in what those are. We've had other episodes that do talk about it. You can also just Google it and get a description on how to perform those things. Some other things you want to limit: caffeine, nicotine, alcohol. Caffeine, most people understand this one. However, what most people don't understand is the actual half-life of caffeine. It's about 5 to 6 hours, depending on the individual. What half-life means is the amount your body metabolizes within a certain time frame at 50%. So if let's give the example, you drink an energy drink, it's got 300 milligrams of caffeine at noon, right? Many people would say, oh, that's plenty of time, right? However, 5 hours after that, instead of 300 milligrams, you've now got 150 milligrams in your system. Another 5 hours after that, we're now talking 10 o'clock when most people are trying to go to bed, you've got 75 milligrams in your system. That is still the equivalent of a cup of coffee, a very strong cup of tea. And so that is going to impair your sleep onset, or at least the depth of your sleep for those first few hours. And remember, we mentioned those first few hours prior to midnight are the most important. So minimizing that caffeine, especially in the afternoon, is incredibly important. Nicotine does not have as long as a half-life. It's about 2 hours, but is still a neurostimulant. And so for a whole host of reasons, you should not be using tobacco products. But for the purpose of this particular episode, it definitely impairs sleep quality and depth. And then alcohol, this one, a lot of people think that it helps. A lot of my patients have come in and they've been using alcohol as a primary means of helping them with sleep for maybe a long period of time. And after a while, realizing it's really only done more damage than it's helped. What alcohol helps with is people falling asleep, turns off the brain, right? Oftentimes. And so people get to sleep faster than they would, or if they're not using alcohol. But then because of its impairment on REM sleep, which is involved in things like memory consolidation and emotional regulation, your sleep quality is not as good. Furthermore, it's a diuretic, and so it makes you urinate more often. And so often the second half of the night tends to be much lighter as a result of that. And so the overall degree of sleep quality tends to be impaired.
And the sugar content. People forget that your body's digesting the alcohol, and that's keeping it awake.
Very true. Very, very true. Limiting large meals and liquids before bed. This is also an important thing. We mentioned previously the 3-2-1 rule. So no food 3 hours before bed, no liquids 2 hours before bed. However, there are a few foods to consider. And this is something I've been doing for a little while. And there's some research to back these particular foods. Things like kiwis, pistachios, tart cherries. These may be helpful at promoting good quality sleep. And so if you, say, finish your dinner with a kiwi, or you have a smoothie with some tart cherry juice and some pistachios thrown in there, that may be beneficial at promoting natural melatonin and the magnesium from those foods to help with improved sleep quality. And then exercising is a very important component of sleep hygiene as well. That creates a degree of sleep drive, like we've talked about. It's going to you're going to need more repair time. And so your body's going to be more incentivized to sleep when it comes time for it. However, exciting your nervous system through exercise a few hours before bed is usually not a good idea. And so exercise during the earlier part of the day often is going to be most optimal from a sleep standpoint.
And I think for a lot of my clients who struggle with anxiety, it's really helpful because it's releasing that energy and, reducing cortisol and other things so that later on, right, of course, related to the exhaustion as well, it helps them to sleep better as well.
And we had an episode previously, you and I, about all the beneficial reasons why exercise helps with your mental health. And I think there were maybe 8 different reasons that we gave. And so that was one of our earlier podcasts, but definitely one to listen to if you listeners haven't listened to it yet.
Yeah. And then another thing that I also stress with sleep hygiene for clients is a bedtime routine is really helpful because our brain knows with schedules of like, oh, what comes next? And so if you have a consistent routine of maybe I start with a shower, then I brush my teeth, and then I read or whatever it may be, your brain starts the same way, like with the sun going down, it starts queuing up. Okay, it's a couple more hours and I'm going to go to sleep. It starts winding down. And that's something that I find super helpful of being just consistent before bedtime to have that routine and queuing up your brain to say, we're going to go to sleep soon.
Absolutely. And I'll throw something else in there, but the idea of an alarm clock to start your nighttime routine often can be helpful. Because if you're getting caught up in whatever else that you're doing, it's often the clock will go by, right?
10 more minutes.
Exactly. And so many times I'll tell my patients, especially if they're taking, say, certain medication at nighttime, set an alarm clock on your phone. When that alarm clock goes off, maybe you take your medication and that starts your nighttime routine, right?
Yeah.
But even if you're not taking medication, maybe that's the time that you should drink your sleepy time tea, right? Or that's the time that you need to go take a shower. Or that's the time that you turn all the screens off and you start to do more relaxing activities, right? Or that's the time you put on your blue light blocking glasses. And so whatever your sleep routine looks like, you pick a couple of things that work best for your lifestyle and start incorporating those things. And then really focus on what seems to work for you and throw away what doesn't. And as you do this over time, most likely your sleep will improve. And as a result, hopefully your mental health and just your overall quality of life will as well.
Yeah. So Jonathan, any closing thoughts that you have for our listeners to maybe emphasize the importance of sleep and to encourage them to implement some of these things?
Yeah, I mean, sleep is one of our core principles of lifestyle habits that we tend to teach. Outside of exercise and nutrition and socializing and spirituality, sleep is one of those core physical things that we all really need. Our bodies can simply just not function whatsoever, or I should say, cannot function optimally, cannot function very well when we're not getting adequate levels of sleep. And so the more you know, the more that you can try to incorporate things in order to better that and hopefully live a happier, healthier life as a result. And so it's incredibly important. So it's worth a little bit of investment. And I love, when you said that earlier, that a lot of these things are investments because yes, it might be a little bit of a inconvenience or might be a little bit of a resistance to get some of these things started, right? It might require doing a little bit of research, might require, buying a product and testing it out. It might require maybe disrupting your normal routine as it stands right now. But But like most routines, the longer you do it, the easier it becomes. It just becomes a part of who you are and what you do. And in the long term, it can make a profound difference on your life. So.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Jonathan. And we want to encourage you to choose at least one or two things and start implementing it. And we can guarantee that your sleep will be optimized. Don't settle for less of a quality of sleep. We all deserve to have healthy, whole minds. And so choose one or two things. And we hope to have you all sleeping like babies.
Thanks for listening. To hear more episodes, find us on social media, or support us financially, visit thebrainpeoplepodcast.com.